Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Just Energy Radio can be heard every Thursday evening from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here live on the Inception Radio Network. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics, where you too can learn to become an energy medicine practitioner, intuitive counselor, or certified medical intuitive. And if that's something you've been interested in moving into a career in the alternative health and intuition field, please do check out that site, www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, or go to my site where you can click on the training link. That will take you to the same information, because right now we are offering a spring special on that training program and have some discount pricing going on till the end of the month. And so if you want to take advantage of it, now would be the time. Okay, let's see. And if you've missed an episode of Just Energy Radio, there are a number of things that you can do. You can go to the Just Energy Radio webpage, www.justenergyradio.com, and check out the archive. You can check it out on YouTube, because we have over 2 years of archives on YouTube. You can come here to the Inception Radio Network and listen to the archive there. You can download the Inception Radio Network app, so you can not only listen to the downloads, but you can also listen to the show while you're at work, working really hard, listening to me talk or the other guests that are on the show. But if you go to the Just Energy Radio webpage, please do sign up for our weekly newsletter, which will keep you informed of the guests that are coming up on the show, or subscribe to our YouTube channel, Just Energy Radio. So this week, again, I just am always overwhelmed and amazed by the excellent guests that come on the show and come back on the show time after time, and today is no exception. And so today we have two great people. In the first hour, we're going to be talking to a good friend, Michael Cremo, about his new book, My Science, My Religion. And in the second hour, we're going to be speaking with Len Caston about the UFO U.S. conspiracy and his book, which is kind of interesting, The Secret Journey to Planet Serpio. But we will find out about that one in the second hour. Let me tell you a little bit about Michael, because it's always a pleasure having him on. Michael Cremo is on the cutting edge of science and culture issues. In the course of a few months' time, he might be found on pilgrimage to sacred sites in India, appearing on a national television show, lecturing at a mainstream science gathering, or speaking to an alternative science gathering. As he crosses disciplinary and cultural boundaries, he presents to his various audiences a compelling case for negotiating a new consensus on the nature of reality. So from www.mcremo.com, the author of My Science, My Religion, Michael Cremo. Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm fine. It's good to be with you and all your listeners.
I just always feel so honored when you come on the show, and and then I think to myself, ooh, I get to pick Michael's brain for a little while more. I get an hour's more of picking that I get to share with the listeners. So that's
Well,
always fun.
it's always an honor to be on the show and have an intelligent conversation with an audience of people who are really interested in these kinds of topics.
Well, thank you. Now I'm blushing, Michael. So your new book, My Science, My Religion, I got really excited about this because, like you, my origin came out of, my husband says I should not say theology, even though theology is the study in the search for God, which is kind of what I do and kind of what you do, and in similar but different ways. But many people view religion and science as something completely different. In your opinion, what are religious texts actually describing the nature of the universe and our time here on Earth? To me, they seem more scientific in nature, in that explanation. And what do you think about that?
Well, I agree with you, Dr. Rita. I think that the text of various ancient wisdom traditions, religious texts, spiritual texts, contain information and insights that can be very valuable for scientific researchers. Now, there are some who would disagree with that. They would say the two things are completely separate. But, even scientists like Einstein, for example, once said, science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. So he saw that there could be a complementary kind of relationship between the two. So I'm on the side of Einstein. I'm on the side of researchers like yourself who believe that science and religion are not completely separate things. Now, there are some who think they should be completely separate. They think science should deal strictly with matter and how it operates according to mathematically described laws. And they go on to speculate that actually that's all there really is, just matter operating according to known physical and gravitational laws, which can be expressed mathematically, and they think there's nothing more to reality than that. However, many scientists down through history have understood there are non-material aspects of reality. Consciousness, for example, where does that come from? Some believe it has an independent existence from matter. I'm one of those who believe that. Some believe that when we look at the order and complexity we observe in the universe, that we are naturally led to conclude there must be some higher intelligence that is responsible for some of the order and complexity that we observe. Now, and those are insights that come from what we could call religion or spirituality. And there are some who would say, well, that's out of bounds. That's not science. That's some other thing, theology, religion, or whatever, but it's not science. I think a real science should deal with everything that's possibly true about the world that we live in. And some of the things that are possibly true is that there is a non-material conscious self, that there is intelligent agency responsible for some of the order and complexity that we observe around us. So I would prefer to have a complete science that deals with everything that's possibly true about ourselves and the world that we live in, rather than a science that just artificially restricts itself to the ordinary chemical elements and how they operate according to mathematically describable chemical and physical laws. That's part of reality, but it's not the whole thing. And I think it would be better to have a science that deals with everything that's possibly true about the world we live in.
But even when I say ancient texts, I'm going to be talking mostly about materials that come out of the Hindu tradition out of India. But don't you think that those ancient texts, in addition to having great information about multiple realms, multiple realities, different levels of consciousness, there's also kind of an implicit history given in them as to our history and the history of our world, our universe, that they are now finding to be true?
Yes, I think that these ancient texts do give information about the history of our universe and the life forms in it. And in my work, I've been very much inspired by my studies in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, especially the Puranas, or the historical and cosmological writings that deal with history. For example, when I started studying the Puranas, I could see they gave a history of the human species that's quite different than anything I'd learned in high school or university from many of my teachers or professors. Mostly in the textbooks in high schools and universities today, they teach that humans like us first came into existence less than 200,000 years ago, having evolved from more primitive ape-like human ancestors. So they would say before 200,000 years ago at most, there were no humans like us on Earth. However, the spiritual texts of ancient India give a different concept. According to those accounts, humans like us have existed since the very beginnings of life on Earth, going back many millions and millions of years. So that inspired me to start looking very deeply into the history of archaeology. Because if you look in the current textbooks, you're only going to see discoveries supporting the current dominant theory of human origins, the Darwinian evolutionary theory, which says humans like us first appeared less than 200,000 years ago. But I decided to look beyond the textbooks. I decided to look at the original scientific reports in many, many different languages from the time of Darwin up to the present. And when I did that, I found many scientific reports of discoveries of human bones, human artifacts, human footprints, many millions of years old, evidence that contradicts the current theories. So in that way, I have found that the insights found in some of these ancient spiritual texts, religious texts, can give inspiration for research. Without having read those ancient texts, I wouldn't have had any reason to question what I had learned from my teachers in high school and university about human origins and antiquity. So I think these insights that come from these ancient texts can be quite valuable, not just for things that are beyond the range of the senses, but things that are within the range of our senses, such as the history of the human species on this planet.
Let's talk about that one point there. I mean, I definitely concede, as you know, that there was life on this earth, intelligent life on this earth, millions and millions and millions and millions of years ago. But why do you contend that it was human life, like you and me human life, versus humanoid life? For example, because you should be proud of me, Michael, I actually read the entire Ramayana, and I started on the Mahabharata, but that was just like even dry for me. But anyway, even in that story, they talk about the giants, and they talk about, all of these gods that are doing all of this stuff. But it seems like there are a number of characters in there that were humanoid, but not human in the contemporary sense of the word.
Well, you're absolutely right about that. Those ancient Sanskrit texts, like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata and the Puranas, describe creatures called vanaras. It means forest dwellers, and they're described as having human-like body, well, human-like intelligence, but ape-like bodies. You know, they have ape-like bodies resembling those of apes and monkeys, but human-like intelligence, and they would have the ability to speak and also the ability to use simpler forms of technology. But they weren't quite as advanced as the human beings of our type. So the two things don't necessarily contradict each other. There were humanoids existing in the ancient past, you could say, various kinds of ape men who, you know, modern science gives names like Australopithecus and Homo habilis and things like that. They existed, but alongside them, according to these ancient writings, humans like us were also existing. And when you look into the history of archaeology, as I did, you'll find there's evidence for that. Yes, ape men of various kinds existed in the distant past, but humans like us were coexisting alongside them, so that the basic picture that you get is not one of evolution of humans from these ape men, but rather the coexistence of these humans like us and various types of ape men or humanoids, as you were calling them. Actually, the ancient Sanskrit writings tell us that there are 400,000 human-like species scattered throughout the entire universe. So I think we even have to expand our conception beyond this earth in order to get a really complete picture of where all the humanoid species really are. So it's a good point that you brought up. Humanoids did exist in the past, but humans like us also existed in the past.
Okay. You know, since you brought up this topic, and I was not planning on going here with you, but, you know, it's fair game. What do you think of some of the current chatter regarding, you know, and I'm sure you've heard this material, you know, the reptilians and the underground bases and the whole New World Order and these multiple races vying for control of the Earth? I mean, I know that you're not an ancient alien guy per se, but I mean, what do you think if there are these other races out there, potentially? Do you think that, one, they're here, or you know, what do you think about that whole thing? I'll just shut up.
Well, of course, I did appear in the Ancient Alien series that aired on the History Channel in some of the episodes of that, although
exactly.
You know, I don't agree with everything that was said on the show. I do stand behind what I did say. I think we're not alone in the universe, and there are a couple reasons why I think that. First of all, I have a lot of respect for the knowledge that's there in the ancient Sanskrit writings, and they do speak of a multi-level universe inhabited by all types of beings. And that's one reason. And then the other reason I accept these things is I think there's evidence for it. It may be controversial evidence, but there are various lines of evidence coming from airline pilots, military people, all categories of people, sightings of what we might call UFOs or different types of aliens. And I would stress, however, that I have an expanded conception of what it means to be an extraterrestrial or an alien or whatever. some people would just restrict those terms to other flesh and blood creatures like ourselves. And I expand it to include different types of beings existing on different levels, different energy levels. I think there are beings in the universe who have bodies made of more subtle energies than our bodies. I think there are completely spiritual beings who sometimes come to visit this world. So I have an expanded conception of what it means to be an extraterrestrial. I don't think it's just the standard types of aliens that are depicted, the grays and this type and that type that are there in popular culture and in some of the UFO alien type of literature. So, for example, in the Bible, you have a picture of, there are humans existing on Earth, but there are also angels who are coming from a higher, more subtle dimension of reality. And then there's a spiritual world where God exists. This is reflected in the cosmologies of practically every culture that's ever existed in the world's history. There's a conception that we're part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings. So I'm really very much in favor of that picture of reality. And yes, I think we're not alone in the universe. We're not alone on this planet.
So I think you're a good person to ask this question to, because this is something that I often ponder. And that's the whole concept of spirit guides. I mean, people talk about their spirit guides and they call in their angels or whatever. But then there's this other part of my brain that goes, but how do you know that your spirit guide is not just some interdimensional extraterrestrial that you're having a conversation with?
Well, those things have to be considered. There's real money, there's counterfeit money, there's gold coins, there's e-dollars, there's kind of like digital money, there's all kinds of money, counterfeit and real, and you have to be able to sort those things out somehow or other. So I think also in the realm that you're talking about, one does have to be careful to be able to distinguish, say, an actual spiritual guide or spirit guide from just some other type of either self-concocted or false kind of teaching. So it is a problem. It's a problem we face every day in our lives in this world, and also when we begin speaking about these other matters, one does have to consider those things. But I think just as there's real money and there's counterfeit money, well, there are real spirit guides, and then there are some that aren't. So,
well, and I'm not even questioning the veracity of the communicator, whether they're a good guide or a bad guide, or Fred the janitor from Zeta Reticuli. I'm not even questioning. My question more is, you talked about the angels, and so people call in, Angel Michael or Archangel Michael is protecting me, or whatever they say. Could it be, and it is a could it be question, that what we term as a spirit guide might actually be one of these multidimensional beings that is working on our behalf? Hopefully we've connected with a good one and not a bad one.
Yeah, and to me, the two things aren't necessarily completely separate conceptually. I would consider, an angel to be an interdimensional being. Angel would be a particular theological or religious term for something, but for me, conceptually, angel or demigod and interdimensional being are just different words for the same type of thing, really. I mean, that's how I would see it.
Yeah, that's how I see it too. But my guides do communicate with me, especially when I'm in session, and they'll be like, blah, blah, blah. And they're hysterical. And then depending on who I'm talking to, then they get into a conversation and I start laughing, and I'm trying to be all serious, and I'm laughing because they crack jokes and it's pretty funny. So whoever mine are, they're pretty funny. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about your book, Forbidden Archaeology. I mean, a little bit about the content in it in a minute. But, that book came out quite a while ago. How was it taken? I mean, because the material that you put forth in it really does not go along the standard line of contemporary archaeology, and even we mentioned the Ancient Alien show, even with a lot of material in the Ancient Alien show.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a maverick in all respects. So
but that's why I love you, Michael.
But as far as the what Forbidden Archaeology is about, it's a collection of reports of human bones, human artifacts, and human footprints that go back far longer than most scientists now are prepared to accept. So one way to judge the result is that after Forbidden Archaeology came out, I decided I wanted to present this kind of information in mainstream scientific conferences. So I was able to do that. I presented a couple of dozen papers on discoveries that I documented in Forbidden Archaeology. I was able to present papers on these topics at mainstream conferences of archaeology, meetings of the World Archaeological Congress, meetings of the European Association of Archaeologists, and other scientific gatherings. Now, I'm not going to say that everybody who heard me give these papers at these scientific conferences agreed with me, but I think it's significant that they allowed me to present the papers at these scientific conferences, and many of those papers are included in this latest book of mine, My Science, My Religion, which I think is a good sign of the impact that the research I did in Forbidden Archaeology has had, that it's circulating in the scientific circles, which I think it's important for people to understand, because some people might think, well, there is some space in the world for information like that, but it's not within the scientific circles. It's on radio shows about unusual topics, or books that circulate among a certain subset of people interested in these things, but it's outside the realm of science. That's what many people would think. However, that's not really a fact. I've been able to speak about these things in the mainstream scientific circles, in mainstream scientific institutions like the Royal Institution in London, the Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow, and others. So, and to demonstrate that is one reason why I put together this latest book of mine, My Science, My Religion, to show that these scientific presentations which include acknowledgement of the religious inspiration for my work are things that I have presented in mainstream scientific circles, and some of them have been published in peer-reviewed scientific publications. So I want to put all those together in this latest book, My Science, My Religion. So, the scientific world, it's now dominated by a group of scientists who are very materialistic in their outlook, and they want to exclude a lot of the kinds of things that I talk about from scientific discourse. But the world of science isn't monolithic. There are scientists who are a little bit more open-minded, who are willing to consider alternative ideas about human origins and antiquity, for example, or alternative ideas about cosmology or physics or consciousness. And they are, it is scientists in that group who are inviting me to make these presentations at scientific conferences, scientific institutions, and universities around the world. So they may not agree with me, but they're open-minded enough to be willing to listen. And among those who do listen, there are some few who actually agree with me, which I think is to be expected at this point. Sometimes that's the way things go in the world of science. For example, when Darwin started out in the mid-19th century, he was by himself. Now, 100, 200 years later, his ideas have become dominant, but it didn't start out that way.
But one of the things that I appreciate about your work and why I think you have been lucky to find inroads into mainstream science is you research material and you report it. And you don't fluff it up with your, 500 theories. It's like, well, here's the evidence, and these are the conclusions that I made with the evidence, but you attack it with a scientific vigor versus this is the point I'm trying to prove kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I do that is I do think, as you were mentioning in your introduction about me to the show, that we are in a very special time in the history of the world that happens every few centuries, where we begin to renegotiate our whole picture of reality. And I think there are a lot of parties to that negotiation. I think the alternative science researchers who are working on the fringes of the scientific world are a part of it, this renegotiation. I think those who are approaching things from different spiritual and religious perspectives are part of this whole big renegotiation of our picture of reality. I think the mainstream scientists are part of it, the psychical researchers, the alternative medicine people, there's, I think, a lot of different parties to this whole renegotiation of our fundamental picture of reality. And I try to stay in touch with the different groups that I see as part of this whole renegotiation. And I think one of the groups is the mainstream scientists. So I try to, when I enter into their circles, I try to respect their discourse, the way they try to express and justify ideas in their community. So I think that has allowed me some entrance into their circles. But I don't restrict myself to those circles. I circulate among the general public, among the paranormal researchers, among different spiritual groups, among different alternative science and alternative history and alternative archaeology groups, because I think everybody's got a piece of the puzzle. Everybody has something to contribute, and I try to stay in touch with all of them.
But that's what makes you be kind of unique that way, and I feel, from my own research that what you do kind of hold up like, hey, you don't have degrees in any of that stuff, but one day they might take you seriously.
Well,
that's my hope.
Some do even, but not the majority. It would be nice to live in a time when the majority of scientists and the majority of the general public accepted, my ideas. That would be nice to be living in such a time. But sometimes it appears that people who have convictions, who have ideas, live in times when those ideas are not, the mainstream ideas, and they may encounter a lot of opposition. But if they're really convinced that their ideas are full of truth, that they're truthful, that they're beneficial to them personally and to other people, then despite the fact that they may be in the minority position, despite the fact that I may now be in a minority position, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to communicate ideas that I think are valuable for me and valuable for others. But I'll leave it up to those others, to decide for themselves whether they think my ideas are of value to them or not.
Good answer. One of the things that I find very interesting is, and I noticed this in My Science, My Religion, which is why I'm bringing it up. What I find interesting is that when you start reading older texts, and where I'm really talking about are texts that come out from like 1850, and I'm going to put like to 1930, you find reports of all kinds of weird stuff, abnormal stuff that you don't hear about today. For example, I'm working on a piece about elongated skulls, and I'm not really sure where that's going, but I'm finishing up this book that was written in 1909, something like that, because they reference a lot of like 1888 conferences and papers and whatever. So at the very late 1800s, very early 1900s. And they're talking about skulls that have been found, elongated skulls or, skulls with cranial deformation all over the world. And we're not talking like one here and one there. But they're talking about a lot of these, and cultures that still, up until fairly recently or even currently practiced cranial deformation. But what's interesting is I've gone online trying to look for pictures to support, my case, and there's none. The only ones you see are the ones that are out of Peru. And in going through your book, it seems like when you would bring up research and information about some of these finds, a lot of them came out of that same time period, of that late 1800 time period. Do you have any idea what's going on with that?
I do, Dr. Rita. I think it was a time when the current consensus had not completely formed yet. When ideas get set in stone, then you pretty much have to toe the line, or else you're not going to have any position in the mainstream scientific circles. So in that period that you're talking about, the late 19th century, the early 20th century, there was a lot of ferment in the scientific world. There was a lot of diversity. There were a lot of scientists exploring different leads, and but around the time of World War I, things began to change a little bit, and I think there were several factors. I think it was at that time that science and government became deeply entangled because, governments, they were willing to give millions and billions of dollars to scientists if they would give them weapons, if they would give them consumer products, if they would give them pharmaceuticals. So at that time, these alliances between big science and big government and big industry started to get really formalized. And scientists realized that in order for us to give the world what it wants and get all the benefits that come from that, the huge amounts of funding that come from corporations and the government, well, we have to organize ourselves collectively into big groups and just focus on giving them what they want. They want weapons, like this started during World War I, and it continued on into World War II, especially where big groups of scientists were developing the atomic bomb and then penicillin and consumer products and things like that. So they became very standardized and very organized and very committed to some particular theories. So a lot of the diversity that was there in science prior to that time disappeared. And one example was, say, like in the early 20th century, before World War I, Pierre and Marie Curie were doing research. They were discovering radium and discovering radioactivity. That's in all the textbooks. But they were also doing research into the paranormal. They were doing research with mediums who had psychokinetic abilities, and they were doing research in that area. That's not in the textbooks anymore. Although, you read about how Marie Curie and Pierre Curie got Nobel Prizes in physics for discovering radium and radioactivity, but all this paranormal research that they did is completely excluded. So I think you're right that period of time, the early 20th century and the late 19th century, were a very interesting time in science where the current dominant consensus really hadn't formed, and scientists were able to explore a lot of different things that are now considered outside the bounds of real science.
But even with that said, for example, I was reading this book, The Ancient Gold Mines of Rhodesia, and the guy's talking about, there's this one site. He just went through all of these different sites where they found gold manufacturing happening, for lack of better words. And he's talking about the terraces in South Africa and this, like, oh, yeah, and they found bones of giants here, and he just goes on. But one, you don't really find any references anywhere else except in these old books to, bones of giants or whatever. But then what happens to this stuff? I mean, what happened to these giant bones or these elongated skulls that they found, or, some of the stuff that you talk about in your book? There's the hammer that's in the rock, or the spark plug, or, some of these other things that you hear about, or there are these reports of, but they seem to have gone into the ethers.
Well, sometimes it's in the storerooms of the museums. There's, like, in Forbidden Archaeology, I talked about the California gold mine discoveries, which were made during the gold rush days in California in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s. The miners were going to the Sierra Nevada mountains, and they were digging tunnels into the sides of the mountains. They were finding human artifacts, obsidian spear points, stone mortars, and pestles in layers of rock that modern geologists tell us are about 50 million years old. So these discoveries are mentioned in a report that was published by Dr. J.D. Whitney, who was the chief government geologist of California, and his report about these California gold mine discoveries was published by Harvard University in 1879. But, they're not mentioned in the textbooks today. So what I did is I did a little bit of research, and I found that he had placed some of those artifacts in the collection of the Museum of Anthropology of the University of California at Berkeley. So when he put them in the museum of the university was in San Francisco. But then there was in the beginning of the 20th century, there was the San Francisco earthquake, and then the collection of the museum was transferred to the University of California at Berkeley, to the Museum of Anthropology there. So they're not displayed to the public, these artifacts from the California gold mines, but they are still there in the collection. But I had to go through quite a bit of bureaucratic procedure in order to get to see them. But finally I was able to get permission from the directors of the museum to go and see them. And they're not kept in the museum itself. They're kept in a storage building several miles from the museum. But I was able to finally see them and take some photographs of them, which can be seen in my science, my religion. So sometimes if you track down the information that you see mentioned in these old reports, you actually can't find where the evidence is today, although it may take quite a bit of research and quite a bit of going through different bureaucratic barriers to finally get to see it. In other cases, because the evidence so radically contradicted the dominant scientific ideas, it just maybe never made its way into an official museum collection. It may have, a researcher may have found it, kept it at home, then he died, and then it's just in some boxes in the garage or something, and gets thrown away. It doesn't get preserved. So that can happen as well.
Well, you're talking, and it was just making me think of that TV show like Warehouse 13. I don't know if you've ever watched that show. I mean, it's kind of goofy, but in the same breath, they have, it makes you think of what they have, for the government with just rows and rows and rows and rows of this, huge area with all the stuff that they don't want anybody to see or touch or look at or interact with.
I mean, some people think, well, that's, just in Hollywood movies like Indiana Jones or something like that. But it actually is a fact that in the collections of the world's museums, there are discoveries, artifacts that aren't shown to the public that really are quite interesting and provide evidence for a worldview that's quite different than the dominant worldview today.
I had Carmen Bolder on the show. Well, I'll say recently, but it wasn't that recently. And we were talking about Egypt, obviously. And she was doing a tour, and we were talking about what were they going to do and stuff like that. And we got talking about the museum in Cairo, and she said, well, they keep changing it. And, and she goes, well, I've been there so many times, and, because she lived there, I think, that she knew the place kind of inside and out. And she went there to take a tour, and she was like, and if we turn left here, we'll end up in this wing or whatever. And like the entire door was gone, and the whole area, it was just shut down. She was amazed. And it seems like, anything that is controversial seems to be disappearing more and more. I mean, thank God for the internet that, people are posting stuff and at least it's getting out there. Like, what do you think about that gear mechanism that was found in Russia? And I don't remember what they dated it to, but it was millions of years old. What did you think about that?
I saw the reports about that. It was dated to be, there were two reports. One was of some round gear-like mechanisms, and then another one was of a bar with some notches in it that would be used with some gears.
Yeah, I was talking about the the round gear-like mechanism. That's the one that I had read.
Those I saw a photograph of that, and one does have to be careful because there are some fossils called crinoids that actually look like round gears. It's amazing. They're a type of fossil, but it's they look like machine parts. It's pretty amazing, but they're just plant and animal fossils that happen to look like that. So one does have to be careful. And sometimes in these reports that circulate on the web, you see the same report just circulating again and again and again with no additional confirming evidence. What I would have liked to have seen about that case would be some analysis of the discovery. In other words, some metallurgical analysis showing that what was there was actually metal parts. That would have been a step that would have made that particular discovery a little more convincing for me. Now, I don't object, in theory, to the idea that there was somebody capable of making, with human-like intelligence, capable of making some type of machinery back 400 million years ago. And in my book, Forbidden Archaeology, that's what it's about. But I do try to have as credible reports as I can find, so...
I mean, you don't take it off of beforeitsnews.com that has always the most up-to-date and reliable information in the world?
Well, I can... I'm not saying that these things are necessarily wrong or not to be believed, but sometimes in trying to make as convincing a case as possible, you would like additional information. And sometimes it's very hard to track down the researchers who are named in some of these reports. And what I would have liked to have seen in the particular case that you're talking about is more evidence documenting that the parts that were pictured were actually metal and not some kind of plant or animal fossils, particularly crinoids, they're called.
No, I agree. I mean, I only have seen that one article, which is pretty sensational, but I have not seen any kind of follow-up information on that. But no, I agree. I think when you work in this area, you have to really look for something to substantiate claims, some real science that is associated with it.
Because, and it all depends, again, what audience you're interested in influencing, because there are some people who are very much ready to accept these things. There's another category of person who's absolutely opposed to these things and won't even consider them. But then there's a category of person who's willing to consider it but needs to be convinced, beyond a reasonable doubt. So it's that category of person that I'm particularly interested in, which is in my work, which is why sometimes I, ask or would like to have additional kind of confirmation of initial reports that come out that are very interesting and do deserve to be considered.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. So I'm looking at the clock, and this hour has gone by so fast. I want to ask one more quick topic, go into one more quick topic. So we started off the show talking about humans being here on the earth in deep, deep antiquity, and you used the case of tools being found in California gold mines, for example. What was their life like? And I guess I'm kind of talking like in level of technology. I mean, you hear stories of vimanas and flying shields. Did we actually, in your opinion, get to that level of technology?
Yes, I think in the past, human civilization has risen and fallen many times, and according to the ancient Sanskrit writings, people in ancient times at certain parts of the time cycles did have advanced technologies, flying machines called vimanas, weapons resembling modern nuclear weapons, a very deep knowledge of biology and things like that. So I think that at different times there have been different levels of civilization and culture in the long history of the earth. And if I could just mention to some of the listeners, if anybody's going to be in the San Francisco area at the end of this month, I'll be talking about these things at the New Living Expo in San Francisco the weekend of the 26th, 27th, 28th of April.
Well, how fun is that? That's my old stomping ground.
You've been to the New Living Expo?
I don't think it was in existence when I lived there. It used to be dominated by Whole Life Expo, so yeah, I don't think I've been to that conference.
The person who started that has also started this new event as well, so it'll be interesting. I just thought I'd mention that in case any of the listeners are in the Bay Area and they, might want to drop in and hear me at the end of April.
That would be great. So say the dates one more time.
The New Living Expo will be the weekend, Friday the 26th, Saturday the 27th, Sunday the 28th of April, and I'm speaking several times there on all of these topics.
Exciting. I mean, if it's put on by the Whole Life people, they do a great event. And your new book, My Science, My Religion, if people want to get a copy of that?
Well, there's a special website for it, mysciencemyreligion.com, and they could also have a look on my personal website, mcremo.com, mcremo.com.
Excellent. Michael, it is always so nice to have you on. I just really enjoy our conversations.
Well, it was really great to be with you again, Dr. Rita, with all your listeners.
Yeah.
On Just Energy Radio.
Just Energy, because, we're all Just Energy. Wait a minute, you already knew that. Bye, Michael. I will let you go and look forward to having you on next time.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, bye. That's Michael Cremo. His book is My Science, My Religion. His webpage is mcremo.com. And we will be back with Len Kasten after
Just
these words
Energy
from our
Radio
sponsor.
with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.